Hi, folks. I'm Denise Howell, and you're about to listen to a blockchain and cryptocurrency-oriented episode of This Week in Law with Aaron Wright, Marco Santori, Emery Rohn, and me. We're going to talk about how we've got blockchain in all kinds of stuff that you might not expect, privacy, intellectual property law, and we're going to talk about how the law is dealing with these technologies as well. All next on This Week in Law.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiL.
Bandwidth for This Week in Law is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is TWiL, This Week in Law with Denise Howell, and this week our intern, Emery Rohn. Episode 318, recorded September 4th, 2015. Blockchain Gang. This episode of This Week in Law is brought to you by FreshBooks, the super simple cloud accounting software that's giving thousands of freelancers and small businesses the tools to save time billing and get paid faster. Try it free at freshbooks.com/TWiL. Hey folks, I hope you are ready for some blockchain because that is what we are all about today on This Week in Law. We're going to go deep on Bitcoin and Ethereum and various cryptocurrencies. We've got an excellent panel of folks, really some of the best scholars in this area. We're so lucky to have them with us. And we have our very own This Week in Law intern, who I'm proud to introduce to you. Sarah is out this week, but Emery is joining us. Emery Rohn is a student at California Western School of Law in San Diego. He's the former intern for our friends at New Media Rights. So we were very happy to inherit him from them. Hello, Emery.
Hello, Denise. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm actually still doing a clinic at New Media Rights, so definitely check them out if you haven't already, newmediarights.org. They're doing some great stuff.
Perfect. And Emery is actually helping us put together another New Media Rights-oriented episode of This Week in Law, so stay tuned in coming weeks for that. We're going to do something a little bit different with the remainder of our panel. Aaron Wright, who I am introducing to you right now, is the director of the Cardozo Law Technology Startup Clinic. He's also an expert in corporate and IP law. Hi, Aaron.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Thanks for having me on the show.
Wonderful to have you back on the show. Aaron's been with us before. We in our previous Bitcoin-oriented episode. And Aaron's going to be with us for the whole show. And we hope to bring in, assuming that all the planets align and schedules and everyone connects with one another via Skype at the appropriate time, a final guest later on in the show to talk about legislative and regulatory concerns. That's Marco Santori. He's counsel at Pillsbury in New York and also heads the firm's digital currency and blockchain technology team. And he's the chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation's Regulatory Affairs Committee. So fingers crossed that we're going to be able to get Marco on the show later in the proceedings. We're going to kind of break the show up into two basic overarching categories, subjects this week. We're going to talk about what Bitcoin and blockchain technology is doing right now, what it might do, and the kinds of problems that it is poised to solve or may already be starting to solve that are legal in scope. So the various things that we talk about, we commonly investigate intellectual property and privacy issues on the show. We're going to look at blockchain technologies interaction in those areas. And then later on in the show, we're going to look at the law and how the law is beginning to grapple with and attempt to regulate blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies. So all that said, let's jump right into it. Let's start with looking at blockchain tech and copyright. So interestingly enough, Creative Commons is creatively using blockchain technology, specifically in France, where it's using a blockchain to register ownership and licensing information. What that's going to do is each creator of a work that wishes to apply a Creative Commons license will get a unique ID for every work that's registered in the Creative Commons blockchain. That ID is actually an address on the blockchain, which allows for people to track all usage of the work on blockchain explorers. Aaron, you gave us this link to chew over and consider and talk about on the show. The first thing that I thought of when I read through and heard this was I wondered about the how it really might eliminate the possibility of unattributed copies, because that's something that people can be concerned about when they're using Creative Commons licenses. Or does it just kind of help matters?
I think it helps matters. So it just kind of as a background, a blockchain is it's a just massively distributed database where you can store information and you can timestamp it, and it's abstracted away from any one individual person or company. So it can be used as kind of a verifiable piece of digital infrastructure to just record basic information. So we've seen it happen in the context of Bitcoin to record information about who owns what at what time. But it can also be used to record information about a variety of other things, including ownership information. And in the context of copyright, ownership information and the ability to track that is really one of the problems that we haven't solved on the internet yet. And people are looking to the blockchain or blockchains in general as a means to kind of begin to solve that problem. So this project, there's a startup, I think it's a European startup called Ascribe. They are using a blockchain to just record information. So you can, let's say you create a digital music file or a piece of digital artwork, you can drop it onto your browser using the service, and they timestamp it, and they create a record of it, they hash the file, and now you basically indicated that this is your file. It stores all the associated information about the author, so your name, maybe a contact information. And with that, it also stores some licensing information. So the whole world can basically at that point know that you created this file, you were the first one to create it, this is the license under which you are licensing that information. And if anybody at any point in time needs to verify that, they have a permanent record to do that. So I think it's a pretty powerful and novel way to use this decentralized database that can be shared and used by anybody, and to use the powerful public aspects of this database as a way to kind of help improve some of the infrastructure that underlies copyrights and other intellectual property law.
So it's not, oops, I'm getting some feedback there. It's not DRM, and it won't prevent people from making copies of the Creative Commons licensed item that's being registered on the blockchain. But do you think it would be helpful? Let's imagine an infringement suit. Someone has Creative Commons licensed something. Their work is being used in a way they did not authorize, and they want to go after the person. How do you think that will play out, and how will having the work registered on the blockchain help them?
So it provides proof of ownership. That would be helpful. It just proves that you own it and you own that copy at that time.
So Aaron,
yeah.
I mean, what exactly is different between just having a private key or a private wallet and sending a transaction to yourself with that same copyright information and the licensing information in that transaction? My question here is, I guess, with Adept, what is guaranteeing that the person actually is the owner of the information that they put on there? What's stopping someone from just putting up on the blockchain saying, this is mine? It seems like with wallets, the ability to have a password would actually let you confirm that this is the actual owner of this item. But with the Adept, it seems like unnecessarily centralization of it. Why would I need to send it to another server for them to put the information up on the blockchain?
Sure. So not again, but this isn't really a complete solution. It's kind of a first putting the toe in the water for using blockchains for purposes of just registering ownership and timestamping data. And So I think you're absolutely right. There's nothing in the system as it's currently built to prevent somebody from taking an existing work that maybe they gained access to beforehand and registering it. But I think the idea is really if you're starting from a point zero, when I'm a creator of a work and I really want to be the first person to register ownership in it, I take it from my computer because I created it. I have the only copy of it, and then I register it. And then if it does leak and go and get spread like everything else on the internet, at least you can have some sort of verifiable fact that you were the one that created it. I think, Denise, you mentioned before DRM. There is actually a way to kind of basically build DRM on top of that. And that is one of the kind of concerning issues with blockchain technology. So there's the concept of a blockchain, which is this decentralized database that can store information. There's also a concept of a smart contract, which is a way to basically store logic or business logic or code on a blockchain and execute it. You can imagine systems getting developed where somebody basically has an ownership right in it, and they have a record, and you need that record in order to access the file or the digital media file. Let's say it's a MP3 or a movie or something like that.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that I've been really interested in with the Creative Commons blockchain is that, with the multi-sig transactions, you could effectively control specifically how your work is being shared by authorizing that sharing as a transaction,
right.
Which I think is sort of what Adept is growing towards, right? If I'm understanding it correctly.
So I haven't spoken directly with the founders of Ascribe who are building the service, but I know for a fact that there are a number of other projects that are looking to do that, and artists that are looking to basically sell, a verified license to a specific file that they own. And if you own that license, it grants you access to that file. And once you have access, you can play it and you can consume it, you can exploit it, but only if you have kind of the ownership rights to it at that specific time. And that's pretty interesting. It points to a potential path to kind of mimic some of the issues that mimic the real world and some of the issues that we struggled with the first sale doctrine in the digital context. You can imagine kind of transferring digital ownership rights to a specific digital file and creating systems where maybe if you transfer that ownership, you can obtain that free and clear of the original copyright owner's rights, which is interesting. But at the same time, it is kind of this form of super DRM or a new version of DRM, which we haven't seen before. So it kind of has this mixed bag, characteristics to it, which in a lot of ways resemble what we kind of experienced with the internet. The internet had a lot of positive things with it. It also had some negative things with it.
Hey guys, I have good news. Marco Santori was actually able to join us earlier than we thought that he might, and he's here with us now. Hey Marco, good to have you on.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Wonderful that you could join us today. I introduced you at the top of the show, but just in case anybody missed it, Marco is counsel at Pillsbury in New York, where he heads the firm's digital currency and blockchain technology team. He's also chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation's Regulatory Affairs Committee. And unfortunately, he is tight on time today. You need to leave us in about a half an hour. Am I right about that?
I do. So we'll make the most of it.
Yes, we will. We're starting off talking about here the Creative Commons move to use a blockchain to register ownership and licensing information. We were about to move off that topic. I think we've pretty much talked about it and gotten everyone's take on it. But if you also have something you'd like to add, now would be the time.
No, well, I think it's great technology. I've been listening in, and you guys have covered most of the hot points there. It's we have the old poor man's copyright, right? This can be the poor geek's copyright.
Yes. Aaron, was that, or Emery, is that you chiming in? You had another comment?
Sorry. I do actually. On the topic of the sort of, ultimate DRM, one of the things that I think is interesting in implementing sort of licensing rights into the blockchain is that while on the one hand, we can say that it's DRM, but on the other hand, it's, introducing the availability of microtransactions to open up new models for these types of licensing rights. So while on the one hand it could be DRM, on the other hand it could enable artists to put their work up on the blockchain with some kind of multi-sig license, and to actually be able to make money through many microtransactions on that. And that would be an example of smart contract DRM that personally I wouldn't find objectionable.
Yeah,
right.
And the microtransaction piece is super interesting. And this is kind of the baseline for it. So you need to layer up to microtransactions. So the first thing you need is to say who owns what right now.
Right.
And you don't want any one entity to control that. So you need kind of a neutral place to store that data. And that's why a blockchain is attractive for it. And then you need the ability to kind of transfer that ownership interest from one party to another. That's what you use these smart contracts to do. You can build systems that fire off these smart contracts so that without any centralized party involved, you could transfer ownership from one party to another. And then the third layer on top of that is this microtransaction layer, where if you are clicking around or somehow interacting with that piece of copyrighted work, you could remit small payments. Maybe they're Bitcoin payments, maybe they're another alternative cryptocurrencies payments. But since you can transfer Bitcoin and other virtual currencies at very, very low denominations, you can enable things like microtransactions, which is great. I mean, people have talked about microtransactions since the 90s, right?
Right.
And it's been hard to implement them for a variety of reasons, because there's fees related to credit cards. So it's hard to really denominate things in less than $1. And now that's kind of a possibility. And with that, there's great things. Maybe this is a way to kind of wean us off of the negative aspects of advertising, all the tracking that the ad tech companies, push, and advertising heavy websites rely on. But at the same time, there's problems with locking things up with microtransactions. We're used to free, right, on the internet. We're used to having our information freely available so that anybody can really access it. Yeah, there's some that's hidden behind a paywall, but even that is generally accessible to some capacity for free. If we move to like a world that's dominated by microtransactions, we lose that. It basically becomes more like a situation where you're getting metered. You're getting metered like you are if you have a cell phone and you have a data plan, and information becomes slightly more expensive. And if you consume a lot of information, or if you need access to a lot of information, then that could be problematic too. So on one hand, it's super interesting. I think we're going to see a lot of experiments with microtransactions. But on the flip side, I think we need to be cautious and say, hey, do we really want these types of models, or do we want to make sure that we can maintain things for free? Because there is some advantages to that, which I think we've reaped over the past 20 years as the internet has expanded.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and put our first MCLE passphrase into this episode of This Week in Law. We embed a couple of hidden phrases in the show. They're not hidden, but you have to listen through to know where they are. They're dropped in at random. Our first phrase is going to be super DRM, and we'll put another one in at some point later in the show. We do this for people who are attorneys or other professionals who listen to the show for professional education credit in their field. If you are a lawyer and you need some information about using the show to help meet your continuing legal education requirements, head on over to wiki.twit.tv, find our show page there, and we've got a whole 50-state breakdown for the United States and various forms and people you need to contact if that's what you're interested in doing. Okay, and I lied at the top of the show. I said we were going to save talking about the legal side of things and the regulatory side of things until the end of the show, or toward the end of the show. But we're going to actually jump there right now because we've got Marco with us, and that's really one of his areas of expertise and interest. So we will come back to talking about Bitcoin technologies that are doing things that you might not have known about in a little while. But right now we're going to talk about how the law is grappling with these technologies. And grappling is a good word because there are a lot of growing pains about people or on the part of people who are attempting to regulate or think about regulating blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies. We've got a bunch of things happening on a number of fronts. Let's start with talking about the UCC, if we could. This is called the Uniform Commercial Code. It itself is sort of a smart contract or a default pseudo contract that applies between businesses engaged in commercial transactions who may not have hammered out every single detail of their commercial relationships. The Uniform Commercial Code applies in all 50 states of the US and fills in the gaps. If something is happening commercially, it tells the parties how they are supposed to behave and what's expected of them under the law. Recently, Aaron, one of your colleagues at Cardozo has decided that the UCC is a bad fit for the kinds of technologies we're talking about on the show today. And if it is going to apply, it's going to have to be amended to make it fit, because cryptocurrency is not money under the current definition of the UCC. Can you give us any more insight on this?
Yeah, so it's a paper from Jean Schroeder, one of my colleagues at Cardozo. She's one of the experts on UCC Article 8 and also Article 9. And she explored kind of two aspects of Bitcoin and virtual currencies general. One is Bitcoin as used as kind of a store of value or as a payment system. And the second one is Bitcoin's potential use to tokenize security. So, a stock in a company, and whether or not that would be permitted under the various provisions of the UCC. And the big thing with Bitcoin as kind of a payment system is that under the UCC, it would be considered a general intangible. And what that means is that as you transfer it, previous rights and interests that people may have had in Bitcoin may not actually get cleared as it would if you transfer, currency or other forms of property. And that may just lead to potential issues later on down the line in bankruptcies or in other disputes. And that may ultimately limit its ability to kind of serve as this global payment backbone, which I think a lot of people are thinking about. But on the flip side, the UCC, as it currently stands, can fully accommodate this emerging concept of using a blockchain to kind of represent shares in a company or a security in some capacity. There's a couple issues that around the edges, but for the most part, it looks like the UCC is kind of already set up to account for it, because any tokenized security would basically be viewed as an uncertificated security, which is permitted under the UCC. It's also generally permitted with several exceptions, or it's generally permitted under Delaware corporate law and under most corporate statutes, unless it's kind of been varied by the parties in their bylaws or in other ways. So there's some good things here. There's also some concerning things. Who knows if there's going to be amendment at some point if Bitcoin really becomes this universal payment system to kind of account for this. But it's just something to kind of be mindful of as people begin to explore this, especially in the context of larger entities or corporations, things like that.
Marco, do you think the UCC and cryptocurrencies are a good fit?
Yeah, so this is a great question. It's something that we talked about a little bit at the American Banker panel just a couple of weeks ago here in New York City. Every major bank now has, if not a pilot program, a team working on this stuff internally, trying to figure out how we can get bonds or equities, securities, or even just cash tokens to trade around on the Bitcoin blockchain or on some other blockchain. And there are real legal impediments to this. And they aren't, they aren't game or showstoppers, but they may be game changers. And it's something that needs to be addressed on a case-by-case basis. So not all banks are trying to use securities, and not all banks are trying to use smart contracts to trade these things along the blockchain. But I think that probably the most important distinction is the difference between clearance and settlement and the actual payout that goes on the back end. So there are a lot of companies that are servicing banks and financial institutions that offer a settlement and clearance layer on top of what's happening in the real world. And the settlement and clearance layer is simply a signal to already regulated entities like broker-dealers or banks to then effectuate those transactions within the legacy framework. So I think that one of the nice things about where this is going is that there's actually a great deal of flexibility that banks and financial institutions have when they integrate this stuff. And it's mostly business and tech stuff, but the legal side informs that as well.
Okay, let's move on to the state of New York, where both Marco and Aaron are located. And the fact that it is the first state that has actually adopted a state law dealing with cryptocurrencies. It's called the BIT license. Marco, can you tell us what it is? It just came into being over the summer. Am I correct?
Yeah. It's the culmination of a conversation that has really started on the federal level a couple of years ago, when a few of us at the foundation were invited by FinCEN to go down and show up in suits and ties and talk about how this stuff can really be good for the world instead of just be a tool for illicit finance and money laundering and drug trafficking and that sort of thing. That conversation continued on to the States, where a year or so ago, the then Ben Lawsky regime at the New York Department of Financial Services decided, look, our laws just aren't appropriate for digital currencies. Our money transmission laws specifically aren't appropriate for digital currencies. And what we need is a digital currency specific framework. And so they held hearings, and I gave testimony at those hearings, and they ultimately came up with a plan, a framework for the regulation of virtual currency companies, mostly regulating custodians and controllers and handlers and the kind of people that you would usually see regulated by a legacy money transmission law, but with some twists. And those twists are where the interesting part happens. And after several iterations over the last year, it's now come to a final version that became effective, I think last month. And we've been helping people put applications together and go into DFS to try to figure out whether they are regulated or not, which is half the battle at least, because of the way that the BIT license is drafted.
Right. So try and give us the short version. I know it's probably hard to do a short version of who is regulated by the New York BIT license law.
Well, at first it was pretty much everyone. And then it's sort of been whittled down. So there's a provision in there called that defines what is virtual currency business activity for the purposes of this law. And at first it included anybody holding, transmitting, converting, controlling and securing virtual currency on behalf of someone else. And then the securing prong was, of course, the subject of much ado in the Bitcoin community, much ire, I guess I should say, in the Bitcoin community. And after enough people reaching out and making enough noise, that was eventually eliminated because it would have brought in mere software developers. And in its place, an exemption was actually put in to clarify that DFS didn't mean to include software developers. So now it includes and requires licensure of either really financial intermediaries, those that are acting as financial intermediaries in the virtual currency ecosystem. So as in the real world, who does it actually regulate? It regulates wallets. It regulates exchanges. It regulates even those doing over-the-counter direct purchase and sale of Bitcoins or any other virtual currency for virtual currency or for real currency. So it mirrors the federal framework in that sense. And it's expansive. And it's good because, well, it's more specific than the law that was on the books before, but in the real world, it's actually so elastic that it, on its face at least, includes a lot of different players that I think DFS probably never intended to include. And to be quite honest, it's difficult for attorneys and for their clients themselves to figure out whether they are regulated, and if so, how, because it tends to speak in metaphor. So the definition of virtual currency business activity includes the word holding. So if you're holding virtual currency on behalf of a New York person, you're regulated. But what does that mean? I mean, and we don't hold Bitcoins. You can't wrap your arms around it. You can't carry it. You can't kick it. It's a metaphor to say you hold Bitcoins. And when it comes to a rapidly evolving and brand new technology, that's difficult to figure out just what holding means. And so sometimes what clients will ask us to do is to walk into DFS and actually go in, have a meeting, and say, look, this is what the product is. This is why we don't think the bit license applies, or this is why we think it should apply in such and such a way. What do you think? And look, they don't always give advisory opinions on the spot, but sometimes it adds to the certainty and helps to bracket risk. And that's some of the work that we've been doing in addition to just applying for people we know are regulated.
Right. It sounds like it might be fairly fluid, and that it might behoove people to err on the side of complying with the law if they are in the business of holding Bitcoins in the way, holding, quote unquote, with air quotes, Bitcoins in the way you described. Aaron, how are you seeing this play out? Are the requirements of the bit license law slowing things down at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think at some level it's good to know that if you obtain a license and you're regulated, there's some benefits to that, right? But those benefits really flow to the parties that obtain the licenses. It creates a barrier to entry. It can create some room between you and competitors who may not have obtained the licenses. The licenses are not cheap. They're expensive. You have to go to a lawyer. You have to go to people who have knowledge of this, and it's a pretty tough regulatory framework to get your head around, like Marco was mentioning, and it's exceptionally broad. Beyond just holding, it also deals with things like controlling virtual currency. There's no safe harbor like we've seen in other online types of statutes. There's limited carve-outs. It uses very broad terms, and I think there's a risk here, right? So virtual currencies can be used for bad purposes, and they can be used for doing things like buying drugs online, or potentially there's rumors that it's been used by certain terrorist organizations. But at the same time, it enables amazing amounts of flow of things of value, of stores of value that can really improve remittance systems and really help a lot of people. And my concern is that this is just a little bit too soon. It's a little bit too quick, and that we're falling into a trap that people have fallen into in the past. So just to give you an example, when cars came out, they were exceptionally dangerous and also exceptionally exciting at the same time. And they were invented in England. And England passed a series of highly, highly restrictive laws known as the Red Flag Act, where they actually required that you needed 3 people to operate a car. You needed someone to drive the car, you needed somebody to feed the car with fuel, and you needed somebody to literally stand in front of the car and wave a red flag. And they were concerned. They were concerned about this, right? They were concerned that these big machines would hurt people. And they were right. Cars can definitely hurt people. We've known that for quite a long time. But these highly restrictive laws that were passed in England and got followed in the rest of Europe really hurt the car manufacturers in those countries for a long time. And it's one of the reasons why in the U.S. we were able to become dominant car manufacturers. So in states like Michigan, they didn't pass these types of laws. They didn't place a lot of restrictions on the development of the technology, and we benefited from that. And by the time England and Europe actually lifted these restrictive rules and regulations, they were left in the dust. And it took them, 7 years before the U.S. was really knocked from the throne as being the dominant car manufacturer for the world. And I worry, we're dealing with a really transformative technology. most of the big venture capitalists view this as something as important as the internet in terms of its potential impact. It extends well beyond finance, but even the fact that it can impact finance and really change the guts of finance means that it's highly disruptive. And my concern is just that we're going to miss out on that if we pass the wrong rules here. And a lot of legal scholars have thought about this deeply. TWiL has a great piece in the Duke Law Journal where he's talked about disruptive technology that came out probably almost a decade ago. And I think that the general idea is maybe we should be a little bit cautious about this type of stuff. We shouldn't just jump in and pass kind of technology specific laws and regulations.
Yeah, that was the topic of my testimony, was the danger of technology specific regulation. I submitted testimony on behalf of the foundation, and I think we have technology neutral regulation to thank for the blossoming of e-commerce and online transactions. I mean, as soon as Amazon started becoming popular, or the precursor to Amazon, I guess, started becoming popular, we didn't start passing a bunch of e-commerce laws in the U.S. And because of that, we have companies like Oracle and Google and Intel and all these companies that are not based in Beijing; they're based here in the U.S. And I think that's something we shouldn't forget.
Yeah, I mean,
both of you are echoing, if we can leap coasts here from New York to California, where California is considering its own law that would govern virtual currencies, Assembly Bill 1326 in California. And it seems like both of you are echoing many of the concerns raised by the Electronic Frontier Foundation here in California about the new proposed law, that it's early days and we don't want to be technology specific and we don't want to endanger innovation while trying to deal with the bogeyman of the problems that can be associated with these currencies. Where do you stand? We'll start with Marco on the California law that's been proposed.
I fancy myself a pragmatic person and someone who lives in the world of today. And for that reason, I think that the California law is going in the right direction. I am opposed on principle to technology-specific regulation. I think that if we're going to have a law, and we are going to have a law, the California effort is a very good one. It is a very good one. California has engaged with the industry. They have engaged in a real multilateral discourse on this, with Coin Center, with my office, with some of the companies directly. And I think that thanks to that dialogue, they've gotten a lot of things right that DFS did not. They've learned from a lot of the missteps in New York and in some other jurisdictions as well. And in the world that we live in today, I think that it's a step in the right direction.
Can I chime in here? Marco, I have to say that I'm not familiar with the specifics as much as the sort of general narrative that I've heard about BitLicense. Heard of sort of creating a rush out of New York from cryptocurrency businesses. Do you know in particular in which ways the California proposal is actually different from the New York BitLicense? How are they avoiding the problems that New York actually ran into?
Well, New York is doing a few different things differently than California, and I'll let Aaron chime in here as a researcher. I think he's probably the best person to speak on the specifics. But the New York effort does a lot of things that the California effort does not. One, the New York effort is incredibly inclusive, and I think most would argue over inclusive. And I don't think that's too controversial a statement in the industry. That's one thing. Its definition of virtual currency business activity is very, very broad, whereas the California version requires full control, full the entire ability to deal in digital currencies. And it might be worth looking at the actual text of the statute now, because it's just one sentence that's particularly relevant to this discussion. But so that's one issue. And second, the New York effort tries to do anti-money laundering on the state level, which is not something that states have typically done before. So if you're going to criticize a law for overreaching, it's pretty easy to do in virtue of, and it's pretty easy to do for the bit license in virtue of the people that the businesses, I should say, that it incorporates on the law and on the things that it requires of those businesses. So those are two relevant differences between New York and California.
Thanks.
Hey, Marco, we would love to chat with you all afternoon, but we know that you're on a tight schedule, and we're very happy that you were able to fit us in and join us today. So I'll go ahead and let you go. Before we sign off with you, is there anything you would like to let us or our viewers and listeners know, either about the Bitcoin Foundation or any developments that you think would be pertinent for people to know?
Well, look, I think that I won't speak on the Bitcoin Foundation because I think it's in something of a transitionary period right now. But I think that just this week in law, right? It's a podcast particularly for lawyers, and I think there's a lot of lawyers interested in this. And I got to say, if you're looking to get involved in this space, there is no better opportunity to really make a difference in law. I mean, they tell us in law school, lawyers make the law, and then we go and we sit behind a desk and we securitize the same asset over and over again. This is not one of those situations. We really have an opportunity to set standards and policies that are going to become law, and they're going to become standards in business. And this is the time. So with that, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity.
We so appreciate your making the time. Would love to have you back on at a future date. Things are not going to slow down in this arena, so we look forward to you.
Not anytime soon.
No, at least to you helping us understand what's going on, and thank you for all the great work you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
All right, Aaron, California, better law than New York's, still not final yet. Any thoughts on its future and what it will mean for the state? And then I'll give you a follow-up question before I even let you answer that one, that comes from someone in IRC. I'm sorry, I can't identify who said it because it's already scrolled off. But excellent question. If we have all the states doing various different approaches toward regulating cryptocurrencies, that's going to get super confusing. Why isn't the federal government trying to jump in here?
Yeah, so I think Marco had it right. I mean, if there's going to be a law, this law is better than what New York has proposed or has implemented. And the real difference is it's done a better job kind of being a bit more narrow and providing more meat onto what it's going to cover. So it's a bit clearer and narrower in terms of what qualifies as virtual currency business activity, or whatever the specific term that the California law is using. And the question from IRC is absolutely right. It's exceptionally messy. There's multiple layers of regulation that are getting applied here. There's state regulation in the form of these money transmission laws. There's 47 states that have money transmission laws. Big companies like PayPal, have dealt with them and grappled with them in the payment space. When Facebook and other services want to implement payments on their through their products, they've had to grapple with these laws. And then there's these federal regulations under the Bank Secrecy Act, which deal with anti-money laundering. So it's a mess. And now added on top of it are these virtual currency related rules and regulations that are proposed, not just implemented in New York, but proposed in California. There's also things on the table in Connecticut and in a variety of other states. So it's really messy, and ultimately it's expensive. And if we're looking to build a society where we encourage innovation and we want to make sure innovation happens here, we just need to be very careful and think deeply about whether or not this is the right way to go. Maybe ultimately, if this does become important enough, there could be conversations around preemption, federal preemption. But I think that that's really far off and probably unlikely, just because we're dealing with things that are traditionally viewed as under the purview of states. So things like banking and finance, and those are generally left to the states. So I think that we're just going to be living through a mess for a while. But I do think that to the extent that we can put the brakes on things collectively, it's a good idea to think about that. And there may be innovative ways to do that. The FCC has experimented with with sandboxing regulations, or creating kind of temporary spaces to see if we change laws, what's their impact, so we can collect facts and other information, so we make sure we get the regulations right. We have lessons from the internet. I know that safe harbors work really well to kind of help spur innovation. So there was issues with copyright when the internet first came out, and copyright owners were clearly concerned with it. But we passed a safe harbor as part of the Digital Millennium Copyright, which enabled sites like YouTube and all the other user-generated content sites that we all love now. Enabled them to flourish. We've also had issues with defamation when the internet first came about, but we have a safe harbor in the communications, the CDA. Which similarly allow a number of sites to operate freely online without fear of liability. I think that if carefully constructed, there could be a safe harbor that gets applied in this context as well. So if you're a real systemic risk of financing terrorism, or permitting money laundering, or fraud, or other things like that, you can be prosecuted, as you should be. But at the same time, it would enable young companies to start up and experiment with this in a variety of different ways. And my fundamental concern is that this innovation just extends beyond finance. It extends into things like copyright, privacy, which I think we're going to talk about, the Internet of Things, and a lot of different areas. And I just don't want these regulations to kind of sweep them up inadvertently, even if it wasn't the intent. Once laws are on the books, once regulations are implemented, as anybody who's a lawyer knows, it's very hard to kind of reverse them. It can take years. And those years in fast-growing markets can cause us to lose a competitive advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. That's I think the big concern here is that we're all interested in seeing a law that is moving in the right direction. But I mean, are there any problem areas that are going to be so damaging to chill entrepreneurial, incentives? Are there any points of the California bill that are really, really worrisome?
It's really around what it means to control a virtual currency.
Right.
What does that mean? Are there ways that you can, prevent or create some space to clarify what it means to control? You mentioned multi-signature technology. I don't know if all the listeners know about that, but it's basically like a virtual escrow account that you can create, or a virtual safe that you can create, where it requires multiple people to sign off on something before you release a transaction. It's unclear under New York if that's permitted. It looks like it's a little bit clearer under California, as proposed, that that's going to be okay. But what happens if you're just using things? You're building a service to just kind of act as an intermediary for microtransactions. It's unclear whether or not you would somehow get swept up into it. Are people going to have to kind of work around these laws and build technology to work around these laws so they don't get swept up in this broad language? I don't really know. And nobody really knows.
It sounds really early.
Yeah, nobody really knows where this technology is going. I don't think anybody in 1996, when the DMCA passed, could have predicted that it would, Facebook would have existed, and a lot of the services that we enjoy today would have existed. But it just happened to have been drafted in such a clever way that it, and it obviously has its problems, but it was drafted in such a way to enable the type of innovation that let us become the leader in the internet.
All right. So as we close out our legal discussion, where things stand now is New York has a law. The various other states are attempting to have laws. California seems close, and seems to have done a good job, at least, of trying to avoid some of the pitfalls that the New York law had. Those are just 2 of our 50 states, and all the rest are in contention to regulate in this area. And of course, the federal government may at some point get involved too, because as much as banking and finance might be traditionally state areas to regulate and pass laws in, interstate commerce is certainly of strong federal concern. So I guess we can summarize by saying it's a big mess, and hopefully the mess will churn around and begin to work toward solutions that make sense. It's I guess a good trend to see that both Aaron and Marco are bigger fans of the California law than the New York law. So we'll just continue to watch this and continue to raise and discuss issues as they arrive. I want to get back to talking about super DRM in a moment in a different context. But before we go there, I'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode of This Week in Law. Our sponsor this week is FreshBooks. If you're a freelancer or run a small business, chances are your least favorite part is rummaging through receipts, trying to keep track of your expenses, creating, formatting, and sending invoices, and the worst, tracking down customers who don't pay you on time. I know for folks like me who run their own business, my law practice is a one-person affair, that the accounting and invoicing side of the equation can be a real pain and can take up a ton of time that you would much rather spend actually doing the productive parts of your business. But of course, no business is productive without getting paid. That's where FreshBooks is absolutely critical to my ability to practice law, will be so for you or any small business owner if you're in the same boat. Particularly, I had a warm and fuzzy feeling about FreshBooks recently, and this happens every time that I bring in a new client to my law practice, because I know that it's going to be simple and straightforward and streamlined, and the whole infrastructure is there to, once I've done, my first bit of work for them, to get the first invoice out. It's going to be fast. It's going to be complete. It's going to look professional. It's going to go out in an expeditious manner instantaneously at the end of the month. You can even automate how you want your invoices sent out if there are things, that you can put on autopilot that are going to recur each month. And getting started with FreshBooks couldn't be easier. Even if you're not a numbers person, you'll be creating and sending invoices in literally minutes. You can organize your expenses easily. It's easy to track your time almost instantly, even on mobile devices. And with their automated late payment reminders, you can avoid those awkward emails or phone calls to late paying clients. If payment hasn't gotten received and logged, the client's just going to receive a reminder from FreshBooks and keeps you out of that loop of having to hammer on your clients to get paid. You'll wonder why you didn't start sooner. So if you have questions, help is free forever, and you can always count on FreshBooks award-winning support rock stars to go above and beyond whenever you need a hand. Getting started is simple, and it's totally free for 30 days. Go to freshbooks.com/TWiL, and don't forget to enter This Week in Law in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Start your 30-day free trial today. Thank you so much, FreshBooks, for your support of This Week in Law. All right, we were talking about creative works in general at the top of the show, and how licensing could happen via blockchain technology. Let's look at music in particular in the world of entertainment. Fascinating report from the Berklee School of Music. Its take on cryptocurrencies as a way to fix problems in the music industry, as a way to streamline transactions, as a way to facilitate payments. One pullout from the report is the investigation of blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies used to manage and track online payments through the value chain directly from fans to music creators is something they're investigating and thinking would be a good idea. Also, a proposed feasible rights database, also tied to blockchain technology, When I read through this, Aaron, I started to think, and we were talking about this a bit earlier, that DRM and things like RIAA lawsuits might become a thing of the past if this Berkeley report's advice is taken.
Yeah, I mean, so the report's really interesting. It kind of memorializes what a number of people have been discussing, which is, you can use these cryptocurrencies to really improve the pipes of the music industry. So the way that artists actually get paid. So, think about an example today. You go to, well, people are increasingly do this, but let's say you download an MP3 from iTunes. Apple collects the 99 cents for the song, and then the label and or the publishing company are responsible for paying out the songwriters and or the performers for the works. And it's a pretty cumbersome process. Music companies have big royalty departments that manage this. There's oftentimes a lot of disputes around it. But you can imagine a newer world where if you're actually online, you download something or you stream something, or there's some other kind of interaction with media where there's a bunch of smart contracts that get fired off, and all of these payment flows automatically happen. So all of the divisions that are necessary to compensate creative workers could happen automatically. They could potentially happen in real time or near real time. So that 99 cents could get divided up so that the songwriters get paid their royalty rate for whatever that is, and at the same time, the performers, and let's say there's multiple performers like a band, they could each receive their pro rata share of of the royalty that they're entitled to, and it could happen quickly, and they could get and they can get paid, and there's an open question as to whether or not you would need to then still have these centralized intermediaries to serve up music. It kind of goes back to this microtransactions point that we were talking about before. You can imagine just people posting things up and systems being developed that look a little bit like DRM, which would facilitate these payments kind of on mass scale. And I think that's a pretty exciting idea. I think it's definitely very it's very favorable to artists. And I know for a fact that there's a number of people that are going to be launching this pretty soon. So I think I would stay tuned. I think there's going to be some really interesting developments in this over the next couple months.
Yeah, I'd personally love to see something along. I'd love to see something along the lines of sort of a Creative Commons smart contract that an artist could just go and plug in to their content that would enable any user to either send them X amount or Y amount or Z amount that would give them X, Y, or Z license. I mean, and the idea is that it could open up new models as well beyond just the typical type of licensing models that we have today. So not only could you say automate the license acquiring process, but you could create a new type of license that maybe someone else has a piece of music that I want to license. So I enter into a smart contract with them that automatically pays them not only the amount that they want, but say a automatic percentage of the amounts that I then share. Because it's all in the blockchain, we can not only have peer-to-peer, but we can have peer-to-peer to peer-to-peer, which I think is again is going to open up a lot of really interesting avenues.
Yeah, so I penned a paper and I mentioned this. I would call that like a remix fee. Like you can automatically enable people to charge remix fees, and it can all happen in kind of a decentralized way, which would be very exciting. But what's interesting about this technology, it both supports kind of existing structures. It enables what I think you were pointing to, which is kind of these brand new structures, which we haven't, we don't have in existence yet, which we can imagine. But at the same time, it also kind of can enable the further decentralization of some of the technologies that copyright owners have struggled with today. So there's a project called Project Alexandria that is basically BitTorrent, but instead of having to go through torrent search engines or Google to find the materials, they use a blockchain to store all those references. So you can imagine having like a DRM, a DMCA proof system where people could list up references to copyrighted material, and since it's stored on a blockchain, it can't necessarily be taken down. So some of the people who are big into pirating music, they've talked about using blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies to kind of expand what they've been doing and kind of their push to kind of completely decentralize and free information from copyright. So it kind of has this Janus face aspect to it, where on the one hand, it can be used to build these kind of new DRM-like systems, but on the other hand, it could support some of the existing trends to kind of make information freely available and to kind of undermine the rights of copyright owners. So I think it's going to be a Wild West. I don't really know where it's going to go, but I think, to the extent that, information truly wants to be free, I think that this technology is going to prove to see which law is right. If it really is almost a law that information wants to be free, I think we'll see it kind of emerge. What will emerge will be more of these purely decentralized systems.
Well, what you're envisioning requires kind of a sea change on the part of creators if they're going to make use of this blockchain ecosystem that we've been imagining here. They're going to have to take that preliminary originating step before the work is ever distributed in any other fashion of registering it on the blockchain, so that you can always point to that entry as, this is the work and here's where it's registered, and any other copy of it is not authorized, or, unless all the particulars of that use have been taken care of. Right. So it's going to require that. But if we do get over that hurdle, go ahead.
Oh, that should be pretty easy. I mean, we're talking about, sending a microtransaction like a 0.0001 Bitcoins from one, wallet to another wallet, and just having on that transaction a note that says, this is, the actual licensing information in that transaction. I mean, I think that, if we're talking about the barriers of entry for registering on the blockchain, I see that going down to basically nothing eventually.
Yeah, maybe it seems somewhat obtuse. Joe or Jane, musician or other creative person, may never have heard of a blockchain or cryptocurrencies at this point in time, but maybe that'll change. But once, if that penetration does happen, and if we do get that sort of sea change where people are registering things as soon as they are created, and maybe this could be built into whatever technologies they are using in the creative process, then I could see, and I think this is what you were getting at, Aaron, folks who are responsible for DMCA compliance, the YouTubes of the world, loving this, because you have absolute proof. When you receive a takedown notice, there's no need for really the kind of very complicated and sometimes inaccurate filtering technology that's in use now, where they're just sort of guessing, is that something that somebody's told us they have rights in and we should take it down? There would be more definitive proof, wouldn't there? Yeah,
that's definitely a piece of it. I think the challenge with using blockchains to track ownership is it's a private registry. So, we've had people have tried, in at least in the music context, to build private registries of ownership information for a while. In the context of music, there was an initiative out of Europe to build kind of a registry that would indicate who owned, relevant compositions and who owned the sound recordings associated with it too. But it's always hard for these private registries to gain comprehension, to make sure that you have every single transfer of ownership, that you have, proper and accurate ownership information off the bat. So I think that, these are closed technological systems like DRM, and there's always kind of leaks in DRM-like systems, which are going to have to be resolved in order for this technology to really gain widespread adoption. And it's really hard for governments to support this type of technology due to various treaties, which make it difficult to place, registration restrictions on copyrighted works off the bat. So this is going to be kind of an interesting and evolving area to kind of see where it is. But I think that the seeds of something novel are here, and something that's definitely worth exploring in more detail, so that we can potentially give people more control over their works, give people more control over who they want to transfer those works to, and potentially even new ways in which they could monetize it and receive compensation for their creative works.
All right. Again, something that's so interesting and that we should keep an eye on as blockchain technologies develop and get integrated into various industries where you might not be thinking about them in that context just yet. Hey, Emery, we have been so excited to get you on the show. We've been so excited to have you as an intern at This Week in Law. You've been doing an excellent job. I know you've got to run because, as any good law student in the fall does, you have a job interview coming up later on today. So we don't want to keep you from that. Before I let you go, though, one of our resources of the week, we usually save these till the end of the show, but one of them is something that you were pivotal in revising and shaping up for release this summer. It is a citizen's legal guide to using Creative Commons licenses. So we're going to just go ahead and share that with the world now. Could you tell us a bit about it, Emery? I think you might be on mute.
There you are. Sorry about that. I was talking to the chat room and didn't want to hear my clicks. Yeah, I'd be glad to. So over the summer, I interned at an organization called New Media Rights. Art Neal and Terry Kerbonic have both been on the show before talking about it. It's basically an organization that offers reduced fee and pro bono support to entrepreneurs and artists. And I worked on a citizen's guide to Creative Commons. We like to create sort of publicly available guides. We have them on various topics, documentary guides, Creative Commons, music licenses. And yeah, I was really proud of that. It's Creative Commons is very interesting. And if you do have any questions, please go to www.newmediarights.org, click on guides at the top, and there you go. It's right there. And Denise, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yes, it's been our pleasure. I'm really glad you were able to join us. I just wanted to let people know, if you're someone who is a creator and you've heard of Creative Commons, but you don't really understand it, you don't really, you're having trouble determining, okay, well, yeah, I'd like my works to be out there and more widely distributed, but this whole notion of choosing a license seems a bit dense and don't really know how this is going to play out. This guide is for you. It's going to walk you through step by step.
And if I had time, I would love to talk for a couple of hours about Creative Commons and blockchain. I really, really would, but I have to go. I got an interview 7 minutes ago. So
yeah, we know. You're just getting back to the blockchain subreddit again because you've been away from it for too long.
The whole 70 minutes. I think they might miss me. But yeah, if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, you can search for me by my name, Emery Roan. It's also at the bottom third, EMORO. You can also email me at earoan@law.cwsl.edu. I'd be happy to field any questions that you have, or if you just want to reach out, glad to talk to you. And yeah, stay tuned to This Week in Law. In the next month or so, I think we're going to have a new media rights special. So definitely enjoy the stuff.
I'm so looking forward to that, and I'm so glad you were able to join us today. Good luck with everything.
Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, Aaron, you and I are going to soldier on and continue talking about these really interesting developments where blockchain technology is being used in areas other than simply people paying one another with Bitcoins. Let's move into privacy. This is super interesting. There was a term here that I need to refamiliarize myself with that's critical to the discussion here. But MIT has developed something called Enigma that lets computers use encrypted data, work with it without decrypting it. And that type of data security is called homomorphic encryption. Can you tell us about that and what it might mean for all of the concerns and hand-wringing that we've been seeing in recent years about personal privacy and data leaks?
Sure. So a bunch of researchers at MIT have been looking at blockchains and thinking, hey, this is really interesting because we can use it as a decentralized database. Maybe we could store personal information on it. So, as you click around the internet, your data wouldn't go necessarily to the website. It would get stored on a blockchain, either your, kind of a personal one or a more public one. And that data would be owned by you, and you would have more control over that data as opposed to the intermediary. And if the intermediary needed that information, they would just request it from you, and you would be able to grant them permission as to whether or not they could use it. So, from everything from your geolocation information at a certain period of time to various other personally identifiable information like your first name, your last name, address, etc. And this could be really beneficial. I mean, if you just entered in some data into kind of to a blockchain once, then you wouldn't have to keep on entering it every time you go into every single website. Blockchains are very secure. They're very hard to break. So it could potentially decrease some of the cybersecurity risks that we've seen emerge, especially over the past couple of years, because it would no longer be owned by these companies like banks or Target or JP Morgan, all these big intermediaries. It'd be owned by everybody individually, and they've kind of taken this even a step further by basically saying that they can wrap all your personal information using a technique called homomorphic encryption. So that it's none of this information is public. It's very anonymous. It's basically like a cloud of data, and you can send a request into this cloud of data and get back the answer without knowing all the data that surrounds it. So it's pretty interesting. It's definitely early stages for it, but I think it points towards kind of another novel application for blockchain technology in a way to actually improve privacy, to give people more control over their information potentially if this technology gets adopted. And that's obviously the big question here, is even if these types of systems can get developed where people are able to basically create their own personal black box of their private information and then grant people access to it, whether or not the laws as they're currently constructed would incentivize such a system to exist. Because right now there's no incentive for a company like Google or Facebook or any of the sites that we visit to not collect information from us, because the privacy laws are not kind of crafted in such a way to make it difficult for them to do that.
Well, there are some incentives, right? They get in trouble when they have bad things happen to the data that they're in charge of, or when they use it in a way that maybe is contemplated by their super broad and never read terms of service, but wasn't really expected and winds up blindsiding the users. Yeah, so they have that incentive.
There's some, of course, there's some incentive to have an honest privacy policy and to implement reasonable security measures. But those instances are more frequent. They're increasingly in the news, but there isn't necessarily a strong incentive for you not to just collect the information off the bat. Right. And I think that's one of the issues. If you want to give users more control over their personal information, there needs to be, some laws that support that shift the balance towards, enabling people to collect that information and store it, as opposed to the intermediaries themselves. I mean, this is something, if you, Lawrence Lessig wrote the well-known book Code. He's kind of talked about this, years ago when that was first published. If you're going to solve privacy issues, it's not just a technology issue, it's a legal issue, and making sure that we shift the balance in ways that actually favor keeping information private. So that was the only point I was trying to make.
Yeah, no, I think this is a fascinating development and definitely bodes well for the future of personal information and data privacy. What seems to me needs to happen is some kind of standard that bubbles up. You need to change people's behavior, right? I mean, right now there are ways in which you can store your personal information privately and try and do what Enigma's goals are here. Only dole out small pieces of it on an as needed and not super broad basis. But I think because the market is so fractured in that area, you don't really see it happen. You do see people just forking over everything they have in order to take advantage of Google's or, name your large company that wants your personal information services. So it would be neat to see something like Enigma emerge as an alternative to that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are working towards it. And even just at a practical level, if these systems are developed, you may not need to log into websites, right? You may not need to register all of this information, and the sharing of this information can happen on the back end in a much more seamless way. So there'll be no more fumbling for passwords, pulling out your credit card to type it in. This would just be persistently running kind of like the internet does, and a service that needed the access to this information could just request it and get the data. And if your settings are set in such a way that you permit the sharing of this information for certain services, then they could get access to that information without having to store it in their own, on their own servers where there's cybersecurity risks and other things like that. So I think the combination of the secure aspects of blockchains, and the ability to kind of use some of these more advanced encryption techniques, which are emerging and need to improve, I think point to potential solutions or novel solutions to some of the privacy issues that we've been facing over the past 20 years.
And it's somewhat ironic that they're naming it Enigma when, the other famous Enigma was about breaking codes or breaking encryption. They're trying to keep things encrypted end to end. So kind of a funny name for it. Let's make Enigma our second passphrase for this episode of This Week in Law for MCLE purposes. We're going to talk about something that doesn't really fall into any of our other categories here, but is a really interesting virtual currency and blockchain development. So let's play our other bumper. I don't know. It's just so funny to see all that build up and then just the word other. I love our bumpers. And what looks like it's going to be a very interesting, possibly groundbreaking development. Ethereum has launched the first decentralized supercomputer for the world. There's a good piece at TechCrunch describing what this is and why it's important, and giving the caveat that although it is launched and it has raised over $10 million in Bitcoin in order to do so, and promises to be able to do lots of very cool things. At the get-go, it's going to be slow and cumbersome and really more of a proof of concept than something that's going to be widely used early on. But why don't you tell us more about it, Aaron, because you know far more than I do.
Sure. So, Ethereum can basically be thought of as an experiment to take some of the smart contracting aspects of blockchains and virtual currencies and really enhance them and explore that technology in more detail. So, smart contract is basically a ability to store, any logic, business logic, in code and have that execute automatically. So that can replicate, traditional legal agreements. It can also be used to coordinate machine-to-machine communications, and it can be used in a variety of other contexts. And Ethereum makes that really easy. So that technology exists. There's smart contract and scripting language with the Bitcoin blockchain. But it hasn't really been fully fleshed out and hasn't really been fully developed. With Ethereum, it was built with that smart contracting idea in mind. And what it basically is as a fundamental level, it's really a massive decentralized computer that anybody can access. So they can run code in this computer. They can run this smart contract code in this computer. And all they have to do is pay a small amount of fees to do that. And people are imagining that using the Ethereum decentralized, worldwide computer, you can begin to run what they're calling dApps, or decentralized applications, on top of them. And the ideas for these decentralized applications are kind of far-ranging, from like a decentralized Reddit, to decentralized stock exchanges and markets, marketplaces, to decentralized video game systems, to really anything under the moon. I think that's very exciting. It is very early stage, But people are really exploring it. So just to give you an example, UBS, which is the big banking institution, they forked a version of the Ethereum blockchain and began to experiment with the issuance of smart bonds using their system because they think it's just easier to kind of do the complex business scenarios that they need to do using an Ethereum blockchain as opposed to the Bitcoin blockchain. So that's kind of one example. It's also being explored by IBM to help facilitate the various communications that they're envisioning for machines that are connected to the internet. So the Internet of Things, they see this as a kind of a way to build in the business logic and to exchange the business logic that will be necessary for one machine to send to another machine in order to build kind of this interoperating world of internet connected devices. And I've played around with it. If you do want to build smart contracts, you can do things pretty easily in it. It takes a couple lines of code, which otherwise, in the Bitcoin blockchain, would take a significant amount of work to do the same thing. So I think it's exciting. I think it's definitely something that people should be paying attention to closely. And I think we're going to see a lot of the kind of new, more innovative aspects of the blockchain space, exploring this technology and using this technology as a backbone, at least for the foreseeable future. But maybe over time, the Bitcoin blockchain will kind of adopt some of the ideas that Ethereum has developed and kind of incorporate it into its own code base.
Right. You mentioned the IBM report about device democracy and incorporating the technologies that we're talking about into the Internet of Things. A quote from there says that our study shows that a low-cost, private-by-design democracy of devices will emerge that will enable new digital economies and create new value while offering consumers and enterprises fundamentally better products and user experiences. That's all pretty general. But it does get back to the privacy concerns we were discussing earlier, correct? It seems like IBM at least is honing in on the fact that if your toaster and refrigerator and Echo and everything else in your house is collecting personal information about you, that's an issue that could perhaps be solved by these technologies.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is really this. In the next 10 to 15 years, they're anticipating that there's going to be, on the order of 50 billion devices connected to the internet. That's a lot of different devices. And those devices are going to be manufactured by a number of different parties. So the question comes, how do we coordinate all these 50 billion devices so that they can communicate with each other? The big value with the Internet of Things is not just connecting a singular device to the internet. It's really enabling those devices to communicate with each other. And that's where we're going to get the real efficiency gains that people are imagining. So one way to build this is you just have one company and they coordinate all the 50 billion devices. That would be a very large and very powerful company, and it would be a huge security risk. So let's say, despite best intentions of this centralized company, they get hacked. Somebody figures out a way to compromise their system, and now one person basically has complete control of all these 50 billion devices. That would be this doomsday scenario that people are trying to avoid. But a blockchain is seen as a piece of software that can serve a similar role. It can store the data that's necessary for these machines to communicate with each other, and it can also relay kind of the business logic that these machines need to kind of interoperate and be useful. So that's what they're hoping to do. And as part of that, they're hoping that that the data that's stored can be stored in a private way so that it's not all publicly available. So blockchains are public, right? They're a database that a number of people own, a number of computers, are running. And therefore, they're completely traceable. You can look at all the data that's being recorded. It can be abstracted in some way with encryption, but it's not completely private. But people are exploring ways to make it more private. But this is, I think this could be one of the biggest potential uses for blockchain technology in general is in the Internet of Things. It's kind of seen as a strong backbone for doing that. And IBM has been experimenting with it. They released a project called Adept. It was a demo where they used blockchain technology as a data store. They used a secure messaging system called Telehash, and they also used BitTorrent, and they were able to have a washing machine order itself new detergent when it was out of detergent. So, I mean, this is the types of scenarios that they're thinking of, like a washing machine that's persistently checking to see if it needs new detergent. It sends a request to the Bitcoin blockchain and shoots that over to some sort of Amazon-like company who has the detergent, and then it gets delivered to you, presumably with some sort of futuristic drone of some sort, dropped at your home. But like that. I mean, that's the vision of what a lot of people are building. And this is kind of one of these core pieces of infrastructure that may facilitate that type of interaction.
We talked a little bit about what MIT is up to with Enigma. It seems like there's at least a related proposal from scholars at the University of Maryland and Cornell called Hawk. Can you tell us about Hawk?
Yeah, so smart contracts, like I mentioned before, they can be used to store business logic, and they can also be used to replicate pieces of traditional contracts, the stuff that lawyers are very familiar with. But as everybody knows, it's really hard for parties to contract unless they're private. So there needs to be a way to keep the information that's getting stored on a blockchain private to enable enough space so that people can use them. And there's a bunch of very, very smart computer scientists and computer scientist researchers at Maryland and at University of Maryland, at Cornell and Princeton that are looking at ways on how to improve privacy. So how can you store data on a blockchain while at the same time keeping that data private so that everybody doesn't know what you're doing? So imagine you were like building some sort of smart contract in a traditional legal context, and people were able to figure out which parties were entering into it. Maybe they could figure out some of the terms that were associated with that agreement by looking at the underlying code. That would be potentially problematic. And so we need to figure out ways in order to enhance the privacy of these systems before they're going to really take off in any large way. And that's the problem that they're trying to tackle.
Okay, so smart contracts might be the salvation of privacy and contracting, and blockchain technology in general might be very privacy assistive and enhancing. But there are some other scholars from Cornell and University of Maryland that are have written a piece about using smart contracts for crime, and start out with a quote from Plato about the ring of Gyges, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which I think has to have been the inspiration for the original ring in the Lord of the Rings series. The quote from Plato, Wikipedia describes the ring of Gyges as a mythical magical artifact mentioned by Plato, granting the owner the power to become invisible at will. And Plato says no man would keep his hands off what was not his own when he could safely take what he liked out of the market, or go into houses and lie with anyone at his pleasure, or kill or release from prison whom he would, and in all respects be like a god among men. And the scholars go on to draw a parallel here between next generation cryptocurrencies such as Ethereum and being able to carry out transactions without repercussions, via criminal smart contracts. Can you give us your take on this?
I mean, I think they're right that this is a possibility. There's the concept of Goodwin's law. Like if you have a long enough conversation, on a message board, it will eventually devolve into references to, Nazis and back and forth. If you ever have a heated conversation with anybody about blockchain technology, there eventually will devolve down to a conversation about assassination rockets and the ability to use this type of technology to do kind of these unscrupulous things. But yeah, I mean, if since unrelated people who are somewhat anonymous, can pledge certain funds or raise small pools of capital to do something. They can set up bounties. So you could in a really doomsday scenario, you could imagine people setting up a bounty to effectuate some sort of crime. Maybe that's stealing something, some sort of theft. Maybe that's something more serious, like calling on for an assassination of some sort. And that's a concerning thing and something that we need to think about. But this is the kind of the downsides to all the benefits that smart contracts can bring. So I don't think my only concern is you kind of have to take this as someone's flagging an issue, but this is just one of the downsides that needs to be weighed against a lot of the other potentially beneficial uses of smart contracts and the ability to kind of execute transactions in real time in a self-executing way.
Right. So circling back to our regulatory discussion, it seems like there are good reasons to try and fend off some of the assassination contracts that could be smartly executed without getting in the way of all of the rest of good commerce and transactions that we want people to be engaging in. Do you think that lawmakers are going to be able to walk that line?
I hope so. I mean, I think as it stands right now, all blockchains are not privacy enhancing. They're completely traceable. You can figure out who people are. There's a number of services that enable you to basically go through and view all the data that's being stored in the Bitcoin network, and you can use these big data analytics to basically pinpoint who that person is. So I think in some ways it really enhances the ability of law enforcement and other regulators to kind of effectuate the policy goals that they're trying to accomplish. I mean, and that's how they basically shut down Silk Road and proved that Dread Pirate Roberts was who he was. They used a blockchain to kind of trace through all the transactions that he did and tied it up with some other information. So over time, it's kind of the flip side to increasing privacy is that you enable bad actors to do things that they otherwise wouldn't feel comfortable doing today. So this is kind of the balance that we're going to have to deal with. But if the technology is there and people want to use it, it's going to be hard to prevent people from doing that. And we may just need to think of different ways to kind of address that.
Right. As someone in IRC pointed out earlier, regulations are inevitable and probably necessary because if these technologies can be exploited, they will be.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. We have a couple of other resources to leave you with before we wrap up the show today. First of all, going back to the various state efforts to legislate in this area, Coin Center is doing a yeoman's job of rounding up all of the various state laws that are pending. Several states are working on these same issues at the same time. And they have a nice chart that tells you who's doing what and where they are in the process. So if you are interested or want to dig deeper on that, you can find that and all of the other discussion points that we've gone over today and are continuing to go over at tagpacker.com/user/thisweekinlaw. That's where we're aggregating folks for stuff to look up after the show if they would like to. And we have another resource that looks fun and interesting for our audience here that came out of an Ethereum-oriented hackathon, something called Lawyerless, created by Jeff Ward, Mike Golden, and Jess Grushak. And it helps people design their own equity contracts. That's where they're going to allow joint ownership, equity ownership of something. I'm not sure quite what. Using Ethereum and its smart contract feature. All they do is specify the owners and the portion of the fund to distribute to each party. Did you look at Lawyerless, Aaron? Have you checked this out?
I have, yeah. I actually know Jeff, one of the developers of it. So it's definitely an interesting project.
Yeah, tell us more about it. What does it accomplish?
I mean, I think it's kind of just an experiment in ways in which you can kind of mimic, kind of traditional legal arrangements using this technology. And the idea that with using Ethereum, this is just a little bit easier to do. So they had some developers and an organization that is attempting to build these applications on the Ethereum network, put together a hackathon, and they used kind of some of the tools that have been developed to make it easy to program these smart contracts, and in a weekend just put together some really interesting projects, and this is one of them. And I do think that that over time, as this technology gets better and simpler, there are ways that it's going to be used to make the practice of law as a very practical matter easier to do, to automate certain things that are difficult now, to help make help lawyers generate contracts and other arrangements on the fly, and potentially represented in source code, or pieces of contracts represented in source code. So I think
Right.
that's what Jeff is exploring, and I think it's a trend that we're only going to see continue. Kind of this concept of a computable contract, or a contract that's partially written with words and partially written in code.
Wow. So it's a good thing that our judges of the future are people like Emery, who understand a bit about how all this stuff works. Because can you imagine a conventional district or superior court judge somewhere in the United States being asked to do smart contract interpretation in present day, trying to figure out, what are the terms of this contract and are they legally enforceable? So while it's going to make contracting more practical and streamlined, I think unpacking it, at least in the short term, is going to be hard. Do you agree?
Yeah, it's going to be hard. And I think if people who are exploring ways in which to use kind of code-based contracts, they need to wrap them up in traditional legal language. They may need to have kind of a human-readable version of it for the short term. The enforcement issues, the enforceability issues, I don't think are a huge issue. It's pretty easy to form a contract or certain types of contracts. You can have oral contracts. They don't necessarily need to even be reduced down into writing. And there's no laws that really dictate how a contract has to be written. We have various statutes, at least in the U.S., that enable you to sign contracts electronically. So I think that there's going to be a lot of innovation here, and lawyers that are thinking about using this, they can, and they just need to be mindful about how they structure it, so that they can ensure that they create legally enforceable contracts.
All right. Well, again, this is all going to be so fun to see unfold. We're very early days of all of this technology and how it's going to impact how we conduct business and exchange information with each other. And we've been so fortunate to have you join us and try and wrap our heads around these complicated issues today, Aaron. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you again.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
So how's the fall term going? You're well into the next law school year. Anything going on at Cardozo that people might want to drop in and partake of?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of stuff going on here. I run a technology clinic. We counsel startups. We have 15 students who can help people out on a pro bono basis. So if anybody is in the New York area and needs help, feel free to reach out to me. We have a series of talks that we put on called the Tech Talks here. And we're going to have a number of interesting programs coming up this year. We're going to have one that's coming up that's going to explore this in a little bit more detail from a financial perspective. So kind of Bitcoin, blockchains and finance, and talk about how it's being used to build like derivative contracts and smart bonds and all these things like that, and wrangling through the legal issues. We're also going to have a program just talking about big data and how it's going to impact the legal profession. So kind of a legal tech type related program. In the spring, we're going to have some programs dealing with cybersecurity, drone law, and also probably a bunch more. And the other thing that's exciting, which I'm kind of excited about, is we're going to be rolling out a course to actually teach lawyers how to program. We think that this type of technology and trends with big data, with data analytics, and just the increasing pace in which software is eating the world, it's essential for lawyers to begin to understand how to code and understand all the concepts that are related with that. So we're doing that internally, and we're hoping over time to kind of also bring that out externally. So if you're in the New York area and you're thinking you're a lawyer and you want to learn more about how to code, you will probably be offering services soon to enable you to learn that.
Oh, what a great thing. Thanks so much for sharing that, Aaron, and take care. We hope to see you again sometime soon on the show. And we hope to see all of you who've joined us again. We do record the show every Friday at 11 o'clock Pacific time, 1800 UTC. You can join us live if you are so inclined, but don't feel compelled to. You can always access the show after the fact at twit.tv/TWiL, TWiL, where our whole archive of shows resides, as well as various suggestions and assistance with how you can watch the shows. You can watch it, of course, right there on your computer screen, but basically any device that you'd like to partake of the show with is available to you, and we encourage you to do it. We're so glad that you have joined us, however you have today. Sarah will be back next week. I hope. She was feeling a bit under the weather, so wish her well. I certainly do, and I'm hoping that you can join us next week and every week when we record This Week in Law. Do get in touch with us. Let us know what's on your mind by emailing us. Sarah is sarahp@twit.tv. I am Denise at twit.tv. Let us know what you thought of this show, other shows, topics you think we should cover. We, from time to time, do what we did today and really drill down deep on a particular topic that's big and complicated. So if you have other ideas of things that you'd like to see us explore in depth, let us know. Guest suggestions, we're always open to those too. So be sure and let us know what's on your mind. We love hearing from you, either here or you can find us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Google+. Or again, just shoot us an email. We're happy to hear from you, whichever way you can. And we hope to see you next week when we record the next episode of This Week in Law. Take care.